Well, this video really should be titled, and I think I may title it that, Why Interest Rates May Never Go Back to Quote Unquote Normal, and by normal, somewhere around 6%. The Federal Reserve has said over and over again, we're going to raise rates this year, and then they do it one little smidgen, 0.25%. And they said we plan on doing it 3 times. Never happened. 2016 rolls around. That's the year they said they would do it 3 times. Never happened. They did it once again in December, just like they did in 2015 December. Now it's 2017, and they said the same thing last December. We'll raise rates. We anticipate 3 times this year. Now it's possible that they just do it to usher in the collapse of everything financial. And again, those derivatives products are all interest rate related. Poof, be gone, explosion of derivatives. But this website, dollarcollapse.com, kind of puts some pieces together, speaking of this whole interest rate thing. And they have an article, 2017's Real Milestone, or Why Interest Rates Can Never Go Back to Normal. I'm going to say may never, because you never know what that sneaky little club's going to do, and for whatever agenda they have. Whatever you think, a lot of times they try to do the opposite. It just never seems to pan out, does it? But it does. His argument is just about flawless. Makes perfect sense, because when you start to realize if we had 6% rates, what the amount we would have to pay on the interest on the debt we owe the world and the Federal Reserve who's holding that debt too, it's quite high. It's not going to be pretty. And that's essentially his case in point. We can't go back to those rates unless, and there is some unless Donald Trump does some things that are extremely extraordinary that nobody would have ever thought happened, such as like wiping out debt or something. So having said that, let's take a little look-see at this article. He's actually got 2 that are kind of related. I was just going to do both of them because they kind of go hand in hand. Forget about NAFTA or OPEC or TPP or crowd size or hand size or any other acronym or stat or concept that obsesses the financial press these days. Only 2 numbers, just 2 numbers, he says, are the only thing that actually matter. And the first thing is the $20 trillion debt we have in this country, which is the level of U.S. federal debt. Will exceed sometime, the 20 trillion anyways, will exceed that sometime around June of this year. So put $20 trillion into perspective. It's about $160,000 per taxpayer, and exists in addition to the mortgage, credit card, auto, and student loan debt that our hypothetical taxpayer probably carries. It is, in short, way too much for the average wage slave to manage without some kind of existential crisis. It's also way more than it used to be. During his tenure, President George W. Bush, 2008 Bush, nearly doubled the government's debt, which is to say his administration borrowed as much as all its predecessors from George Washington through Bill Clinton combined. At the time, this seemed like a never-to-be-duplicated feat of government profligacy. But the very next administration topped it, taking the federal debt from $10 trillion to the, again, soon-to-be-achieved $20 trillion. It's so close, I always round off. It's right there, $20 trillion. And the incoming administration apparently sees no problem with continuing the pattern. Again, what does Trump want to do? He wants to spend some money. The other meaningful number is 6.620. That is the average interest rate that the U.S. government paid on its various debts in 2000, the year before the great monetary experiment of quantitative easing, zero interest rates, and all the rest began. When talking heads at the Fed and elsewhere refer to normalizing interest rates, they're proposing a return to the 6% average. But of course, the last time that rate prevailed, our debts were just a little bit lower, as in a lot of bit lower. Run the numbers on today's obligations, and you get, well, let's see, he says, 20 trillion times 6% is $1.2 trillion a year in just the interest expense. That does not include paying off the principal, right? That's just the interest. To put that into perspective, it's $15,000 a year per family of four, or about a fourth of what that typical American family earns. It's 31% of the federal budget, which would mean massive cuts and other spending programs. The conclusion: it can't happen without causing one of the following three things: government spending cuts and or tax increases that impose Greek-style austerity on Americans who won't respond well to their sudden demotion into third world status. Or number two, a new round of monetary experiments involving the forgiveness of the government's debts financed with newly created dollars. This will work as long as dollars remain universally accepted as a store of value. History, by the way, offers no such examples. Number three, an overt effort to devalue the dollar. What has Trump been saying lately about that? With the goal of paying the interest in full, but again with newly created, much less valuable currency. The resulting dilemma: if we hope to live within our means, interest rates can never be allowed to rise. But if interest rates don't rise, the Fed is forced to create a tsunami of new dollars to keep rates low and must take its chances with inflation, currency war, crack-up boom, and all the other black swans that live in the land of monetary excess, which is why the sound money community keeps harping on gold. All the politically acceptable policy options have inflation/devaluation at their core. And those things are always and everywhere great for real assets. So you got your precious metals, bring it on. Your precious metals are going to be sitting really, really, really pretty. His other article, closely related. Speaking of devaluing, in a big part of the dollar index, USD, basket of currencies. Well, it's not the dollar index, but the SDR has what now? China, Japan, United States, Britain, whatever, or the euro. But again, the dollar index is kind of a basket of currencies as well, with the U.S. dollar, and I think it's against the euro and maybe a couple other currencies, or one other one. I don't remember. That's what they always show it against when you look at the dollar index. Oh, it's up 90 today, or 110, 102. Wow, it's super high against these other currencies. It's just one currency against another. But Donald Trump has already said our dollar's too high. He's already said it, dollar's too high. How can we possibly compete with exports? We're going to bring all these jobs back here, factories, everything, and then we need to sell the stuff. It'd be nice to sell it overseas, correct? But we can't do that with a strong dollar. So I think, as I've said a few times, race to the bottom. So he says, welcome to the currency war, part 23. Europe will devalue or dissolve. No rest for the wicked. With the shockwaves from Brexit and President Trump still reverberating around the world, the established order is bracing for more bad news. Next up is a December 4th Italian constitutional referendum that might end the reign of centrist Prime Minister Matteo Renzi and replace him with a bunch of anti-Euro people from the Brexit/Trump part of the spectrum. And here's a little excerpt from a much longer, deep context Guardian UK article. As the air of insurgency becomes unmistakable, the technical debate over reforming a 70-year-old constitution, yes, 70-year-old constitution, is in danger of becoming a sideshow. Perhaps the most disturbing poll for Renzi found last week that only 40% of Italians say they will vote on the reform package. 56% consider their vote to be more a verdict on the prime minister, his government, and by implication, the state of the nation. If that bigger picture still dominates come polling day, it is hard to see anything but defeat for a man once billed as Italy's Tony Blair. After 13 years of flattening economy, Italians are battered, bruised, and looking for somebody to blame. Unemployment is running at 11%, but it's close to 40% among the younger folks. who make up the bulk of the 107,000 who left the country last year to seek work abroad. The aftermath of the financial crash is estimated to have wiped out about a quarter of Italian industry. The average family income is now less than it was in 2007. This sounds like America, does it not? Traditionally, among the most enthusiastic proponents of European integration, ordinary Italians are furious at the EU's failure to share the burden of the huge migration surge to their southern shores. Lectures from Brussels on the need to cut public spending and balance budgets, given the desperately straitened times, have added insult to injury. It is no coincidence that a current bookshop bestseller, 1960, by the way, The Best Year of Your Lives, well, the title, 1960, The Best Year of Your Lives, is a nostalgic evocation of the Italian post-war economic miracle when the country's growth was judged to outstrip Germany's. As initially strong support for his constitutional reforms has plummeted, Renzi has tried to turn the tide in an attempt to woo an increasingly Eurosceptic electorate. He has begun to talk to Brussels, temporarily abandoning austerity targets and threatening to veto the EU budget unless other member states show more solidarity over migration. So he says, and not long after Italy takes its shot at the status quo, France will go to the polls for a runoff presidential vote, pitting far-right François Fillon against extreme-right Marine Le Pen, who, didn't she meet Trump the other day? Wasn't she in Trump Towers the other day, secretly? Oh, she's just having breakfast downstairs. Oh, yeah, I bet she's not going to meet with Trump. It's hard to overstate the threat posed by these two votes in the EU, the world's largest economic entity, and by implication to the rest of the global financial system. Italy is the third biggest country in the EU, and France is the second. Let either pull out, and the result might be dissolution and the end of the euro. I've been saying this for a while. It has to be finished. One's going to fall, and as soon as the one falls like dominoes, another one will, and another one will. We had Brexit. Now we've got these two standing up sharp, ready to fall over. Italian banking crisis, again, they're having to buy essentially the bank, bail it out, taxpayer bailout. We now own 70% of the bank. Actually, I think it's now 75% because nobody would touch that turd with a 10-foot pole. And that's Monte Paschi Bank. So they're saying we don't want to do the austerity stuff, and you're telling us your mandate in the EU says we need to. We're putting that on pause right now is what he said. Which means what? They can't do it. It's absolute political suicide. And I think by the time it gets to the end of the year anyways for the vote, it's not going to matter. People are already understanding what's going to happen. You're not going to get re-voted back in. Okay? That's how this is going to go. So what does a fiat currency / fractional reserve banking establishment do when confronted with such a looming catastrophe? What it always does, of course. Cut interest rates and ramp up money creation in order to devalue the currency. Put another way, the only way to ease the burden on common currency places on inefficient countries like Italy and France is to cut the value of the euro to the point where French wine and Italian cars are screaming buys around the world. Those industries grow and hire more people who in turn are more open to preserving the status quo. Now combine a massive euro devaluation, which by the way is already in progress, with a $1 trillion U.S. infrastructure program financed with borrowed money, and the result might be a world awash in unprecedented amounts of liquidity. If that's not paradise for precious metals, then it's hard to imagine what would be. Take care, my friends.